The year was 2347, and humanity had spread to the stars. 3 star systems now held human colonies. Millions of people lived on distant worlds, building new cities under alien skies. But in all their travels, humans had never found what they truly searched for. They had never found another intelligent species. The universe seemed empty and quiet. Captain Park Yuna stood in the control room of Earth's deep space, listening array. The station floated in orbit above the Pacific Ocean. Its massive dish pointed toward the endless black of space. For 15 years, Yuna had listened to the cosmos. She had heard the hum of distant stars. She had recorded the echoes of ancient explosions. But she had never heard a voice. Until tonight. The signal came from the Kepler 442 system, a place humanity had only observed through telescopes. It was weak at first, almost lost in the background noise of the universe. But as Yuna adjusted the sensors, the pattern became clear. It was not random. It was not natural. Something intelligent had created this signal. Her heart beat faster as she called for Dr. Kim Do-hyun, the station's linguist. Do-hyun was a quiet man with tired eyes, but those eyes grew wide when he saw the data. He worked through the night, comparing the signal to every known pattern. By morning, he had his answer. "It is a language," Do-hyun said, his voice shaking slightly. "Someone out there is speaking. And Captain, I think they are asking for help." The message, once decoded, told a terrible story. A species called the Villani lived on a world named Terrace. They were a peaceful people who had never known war. But now, an enemy called the Keth Dominion had come to their planet. The Keth were harvesters. They took everything from a world until nothing remained. They enslaved the populations. They stripped the land of minerals. And then they moved on, leaving only death behind. The Villani had sent their message to a group called the Galactic Concord, an alliance of spacefaring species. But the Concord had refused to help. The Villani were too small, too weak. The Keth were too powerful to challenge. The message humanity received was the Villani's last hope. They had sent it into the unknown, hoping that someone somewhere might care enough to answer. Yuna stared at the decoded words on her screen. She had dreamed of first contact her entire life. She had imagined celebrations and joy. She had never imagined it would begin with a cry of despair. Within hours, the news reached Earth. Admiral Lee Jin-ho received the report at United Earth Command. He was an old soldier with gray hair and a face marked by years of difficult decisions. He had fought in the colony wars of his youth. He had seen what humans could do to each other, and he had hoped those days were behind them. Now, a new question faced him. What would humanity do when strangers asked for help? He called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Council. Representatives from every nation and colony gathered in the Great Hall. The debate that followed would be remembered for centuries. "We know nothing about these species," argued one representative. "We do not know the Keth's strength. We do not know if the Villani are telling the truth. This could be a trap. And if it is not a trap?" Responded another. "If we ignore this call, what does that say about humanity? We have always believed we were alone. Now we know others exist. Will our first answer to the universe be silence?" Lieutenant Choi Mireille watched the debate from the back of the room. She was young, only 28 years old, but she had already proven herself as a tactical officer. Her commanders said she had good instincts. Right now, her instincts were telling her something important. She thought of her grandmother, a woman who had lived through hard times on Earth. Her grandmother used to tell stories about the old wars, about times when ordinary people had to make impossible choices. "The right thing is rarely the easy thing," her grandmother would say. "But that is exactly why it matters." Myra looked around the council chamber. These were the most powerful people in human civilization. They had ships, weapons, technology. They had the ability to help. But did they have the courage? Admiral Lee Jinho stood to speak. The room fell silent. "I will not pretend this is a simple decision," he said. "We do not know what waits for us in that distant system. We could lose ships. We could lose lives. We could start a war that reaches all the way back to Earth." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "But I became a soldier to protect people. Not just human people. People. And right now, somewhere in the darkness, people are dying because no one will help them." He looked around at the representatives. "The Galactic Concord has calculated that the Vellani are not worth saving. I refuse to make that calculation. I refuse to weigh innocent lives against political convenience. Either we stand for something, or we stand for nothing." The vote was called. It was close. Some representatives voted no, afraid of the unknown danger. Others voted yes, moved by the simple idea that helping those in need was what made humanity worth saving. In the end, the yes votes won by a margin of 3. Humanity would answer the call. In the days that followed, a fleet was assembled. 12 ships, the best Earth had to offer. The carrier Horizon's Edge would lead them, with Admiral Lee Jinho in command. Dr. Yoon Hana, one of Earth's finest doctors, was assigned as chief medical officer. She prepared for injuries they had never seen, from weapons they did not understand. Lieutenant Choi Mai-rae requested a transfer to the fleet. Her commanders tried to refuse. The mission was too dangerous, they said. She was too valuable to lose. But Mai-rae insisted. She had heard the Vellani's message. She had heard the fear in those translated words. And she knew that if she did not go, she would regret it for the rest of her life. On the day of departure, millions of people watched the fleet leave Earth's orbit. Children pressed their faces to windows. Old men saluted. Mothers held their babies up to see the ships disappear into the stars. No one knew what would happen next. No one knew if the fleet would ever return. But something had changed. For the first time in their history, humans were not just exploring the universe. They were answering it. The journey would take 3 months. 3 months of travel through the empty space between stars. 3 months to prepare for whatever they might find. Captain Park Yuna remained at her listening station. She continued to monitor the Vellani signal. It grew weaker each day. Whatever was happening on Terrace, it was getting worse. On the fleet, Admiral Lee Jinho gathered his officers. "I will not lie to you," he said. "We are sailing into the unknown. But humanity has always sailed into the unknown. That is who we are. We crossed oceans before we knew what lay on the other side. We reached for the moon before we knew if we could survive there. And now, we go to meet our first alien civilization." He looked at each officer in turn. "Some of you may not come home. I cannot promise victory. But I can promise this. Whatever happens, we will not turn back. We will answer the call. And we will show the universe what humanity truly is." Lieutenant Choi Mai-rae felt those words settle into her heart. Fear was there, yes. But something else was there too. Something stronger. Hope. 3 months later, the fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. What they saw made their blood run cold. Terrace was burning. Massive ships, shaped like dark insects, orbited the planet. Beams of light cut down from their hulls, carving into the surface. Smaller vessels moved in swarms, collecting whatever the beams pulled up. The Keth had come, and they were not finished. Admiral Lee Jinho stared at the destruction. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. They were only 12 ships against an armada. They had never fought anyone but themselves. What chance did they have? Then a communication came through. A weak signal from the planet's surface. A voice, thin and desperate, spoke in the Volani language. Dr. Kim Do-hyun, who had joined the fleet, translated quickly. "Please," the voice said. "Is anyone there? We are still alive. Some of us are still alive. Please, if you can hear us, help us." Lee Jin-ho closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, his doubt was gone. "All ships," he said into the fleet-wide channel, "prepare for battle. We did not come this far to watch." The engines roared. The weapons powered up. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The human fleet moved toward Terrace like a pack of wolves approaching a wounded deer. But the wolves were small, and the hunters already circling the deer were giants. Admiral Lee Jin-ho studied the enemy from the bridge of the horizon's edge. The Keth vessels were enormous. Their largest ships were 10 times the size of anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls were dark and rough, like the shells of ancient beetles. Weapons jutted from every surface, and there were so many of them. He counted 47 vessels before he stopped counting. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Choi Mai-ri from her tactical station, "they have detected us. 6 ships are breaking formation and moving in our direction." Lee Jin-ho nodded slowly. This was the moment. Humanity's first contact with an alien species was about to become humanity's first battle with one. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Let them hear us." The communication officer worked quickly. A moment later, Lee Jin-ho spoke. "Keth Dominion vessels. This is Admiral Lee Jin-ho of the United Earth Fleet. We have come in response to a distress call from the people of this planet. We demand that you stop your attack immediately and withdraw from this system." Silence. The bridge crew waited. Then a response came. The voice was harsh and clicking, like stones grinding together. The translator worked to convert it to human language. "Unknown vessels. You have entered Dominion harvesting space. Leave now, or you will be added to the harvest." Lee Jin-ho felt a cold anger rise in his chest. Added to the harvest. These beings spoke of genocide as casually as farmers spoke of cutting wheat. "We will not leave," he said. "These people asked for help. We answered." Another pause. Then, a sound that might have been laughter. "You are small. You are few. You are nothing. The Concord species would not help them. What makes you think you can?" "Perhaps because we did not ask permission." He cut the channel and turned to his officers. "All ships, battle formation. Target the lead vessels. Let us show them what nothing can do." The 6 Keth ships opened fire first. Beams of burning light cut through space toward the human fleet. But the human ships were already moving. Earth vessels were designed for speed and agility. They had been built to navigate asteroid fields and fight in the chaotic battles of the colony wars. The Keth beams struck empty space where the human ships had been moments before. Lieutenant Mai-ri watched her tactical display, her mind racing. The Keth fought in rigid patterns. Their ships moved together like dancers following a script. Every turn, every attack came in perfect synchronization. It was impressive in a way, but it was also predictable. "Admiral," she said, "I see a pattern. Their formation relies on the lead ship for coordination. If we take that one out, the others may become confused." Lee Jin-ho considered this for only a second. "Do it, all ships. Concentrate fire on the lead vessel." 12 human ships turned as one. Their weapons, designed to break apart asteroids and fight rebels, now focused on a single target. The lead Keth vessel took hit after hit. Its shields flickered. Its hull cracked. And then, in a flash of light and fire, it broke apart. The effect was immediate. The remaining 5 Keth ships faltered. Their perfect formation scattered. They fired wildly, missing their targets by wide margins. "They are not used to losing," Myray said quietly. "Then we will teach them," Lee Jinho replied. The battle that followed was short but fierce. Human ships darted between the larger Keth vessels, striking weak points and retreating before the enemy could respond. 2 human ships took damage. One lost its main engine. But by the end, all 6 Keth vessels were destroyed or crippled. The remaining Keth fleet watched from orbit around Taris. They had stopped their harvesting operations. For the first time in centuries, the Keth Dominion had witnessed something they did not understand. Someone had fought back, and someone had won. Admiral Lee Jinho ordered his fleet to hold position. He opened a channel to the planet's surface. "Vellani people, this is the United Earth Fleet. We received your message. We have come to help." The response took several minutes. When it came, it was filled with emotion that the translator could barely capture. "You came," the voice said. It belonged to a being named Thiessen, a leader among the Vellani survivors. "You actually came. We sent that message into the void, hoping against hope. We never truly believed anyone would answer." "We answered," Lee Jinho said simply. "Now tell us what you need." A shuttle was prepared. Dr. Yoon Hana, the fleet's chief medical officer, led a team down to the surface. Lieutenant Myray insisted on joining them. She wanted to see the people they had come to save. The shuttle descended through smoke and ash. Taris had been a beautiful world once. The Vellani had built cities of glass and light. They had cultivated gardens that covered entire continents. Now, everything burned. The shuttle landed near a cave system where survivors had hidden. When the humans stepped out, they found themselves surrounded by beings unlike anything they had imagined. The Vellani were tall but incredibly thin. Their limbs looked like they might break in a strong wind. Their skin was almost transparent, and soft light glowed beneath it like candles behind paper. Their eyes were large and dark, filled with an intelligence that needed no translation. Thiessen stepped forward. The Vellani leader was shorter than the others, and there were marks on their skin that suggested age. They looked at the humans with wonder and fear mixed together. "You are so solid," Thiessen said through the translator. "So dense. What world could produce beings like you?" Dr. Yoon Hana smiled gently. "A difficult one," she said. "But we are here to help. Where are you wounded?" Thiessen led them deeper into the caves. What Hannah found there broke her heart. Hundreds of Vellani lay on the cave floor. Many had injuries that should have been simple to treat. Burns, broken limbs, infections. But the Vellani bodies were so fragile that even small wounds became deadly. Their immune systems, evolved on a world without dangerous diseases, could not fight infection. Their bones, formed under low gravity, shattered easily. Hannah got to work immediately. She had brought supplies designed for human injuries, but she adapted quickly. She set bones with delicate care. She cleaned wounds and applied medicine. She worked for hours without rest. Lieutenant Myray helped where she could. She carried injured Vellani with hands that seemed terribly rough compared to their delicate bodies. She tried to be gentle, but even her softest touch made them wince. "Your hands," one young Vellani said to her, eyes wide. "They are like stone." Myray looked at her own hands. To her, they seemed normal, soft even. But to these beings, humans were made of something harder than they could imagine. While the medical team worked, Thiessen spoke with Admiral Lee Jinho through the communication link. "You must understand," Thiessen said. "We are not warriors. Our people have never known violence. We developed on a world without predators, without natural disasters, without competition. We built our civilization on cooperation and peace. When the Keth came, we did not know how to fight. We did not even have weapons. Yet you survived," Lee Jinho said. Barely, and only by hiding. The Keth do not value us as slaves. They find our bodies too weak for labor. So they simply harvest our world and leave us to die slowly. Thisan's voice grew heavy with grief. We sent a message to the Galactic Concord. We thought that surely someone would object to what was happening. But they calculated the cost of war against the Keth. They decided we were not worth the risk. We did not make that calculation. Thisan was quiet for a long moment. Why? You did not know us. You did not owe us anything. Why did you come? Admiral Lee Jinho thought of all the grand words he could say. He thought of speeches about justice and morality. But in the end, he settled on a simple truth. Because you asked, he said. And because we could. On the surface, Dr. Hana continued her work. She saved lives that day. Many lives. But she also learned something important about the Villani. They were not weak in spirit. They were brave in their own way. They had hidden their children in the deepest caves. They had shared their last food with the injured. They had kept hope alive, even when hope seemed impossible. Lieutenant Miraz sat with a group of Villani children as their parents received treatment. The children were curious about her. They touched her hair, which was thick and dark compared to their own transparent strands. They marveled at how heavy she seemed, how solid. One child asked, "Are you scared of the Keth?" Mireille considered the question. "Yes," she admitted. "But being scared does not mean you cannot act. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is act despite the fear." The child thought about this. Our teachers said the universe was empty and cold. They said no one would help us. But you came. Mireille smiled. The universe is not empty, and it does not have to be cold. We came because that is what people should do. When someone is hurt, you help them. It is that simple. Above the planet, the Keth fleet watched and waited. They had not expected resistance. They did not understand these strange new beings who fought with such ferocity. But they were not defeated. They were merely surprised. Reports went out across Keth communication networks. New species detected. Origin unknown. Combat capabilities significant. Further analysis required. And in the halls of the Galactic Concord, far from the burning world of Terrace, other species began to take notice. The humans had done something no one had expected. The Keth had received reinforcements. 20 more ships arrived from their nearest colony. Their commanders had studied the recordings of the first battle. They had seen how the small human vessels moved, how they struck and retreated. They thought they understood now. They thought they were ready. They were wrong. Marine Sergeant Bei Sun-ho stood in the boarding craft as it launched toward the largest Keth harvester. His team of 12 soldiers checked their weapons and armor. They had trained for close combat in ships and stations. They had never trained to fight aliens. But training only took you so far. The rest was instinct, courage, and stubbornness. Remember, Sun-ho told his team, we do not know what we will find inside. Stay close. Watch each other's backs. And if something moves toward you with a weapon, put it down. The boarding craft punched through the harvester's hull. Sun-ho was the first through the breach. What he found inside made him freeze for just a moment. The Keth were insectoid beings with hard shells and too many limbs. They stood taller than humans, and their bodies were covered in sharp edges. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, were clusters of black orbs that seemed to see everything at once. They carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. But when they saw the human soldiers emerge from the breach, something strange happened. They hesitated. Sun-ho did not hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired. The first Keth fell. Then the second. His team poured through the opening, spreading out, taking cover, and engaging the enemy with practiced efficiency. The Keth fought back, but they fought badly. Their movements were jerky and uncertain. Their aim was poor. Several turned and ran instead of standing their ground. Sunho did not understand it at first. These were the great conquerors? These were the beings who had destroyed countless worlds. They seemed almost afraid. The answer came later, after the Harvester was captured. When the Keth survivors were interrogated, the translator struggled to capture their words. Their language was filled with concepts that had no human equivalent. But one phrase came through clearly. Deathworld creatures, they called to humans. Impossible beings from an impossible place. Admiral Lee Jinho received the report with confusion. What did they mean by Deathworld? The answer came from the Galactic Concord. Word of the human intervention had spread across the galaxy. Species that had watched the Volani suffer in silence were now watching the humans fight. And they were looking up information about this new species. What they found terrified them. Transmission came from a Concord representative, a being called Veth from a species known as the Morith. The Morith were considered ancient and wise. They had records going back millions of years. And they had a file on Earth. Your world, Veth said through the communication channel, is classified in our records as uninhabitable. It is a Class 5 environment. What you call Earth, we call a death world. Admiral Lee Jinho frowned. Uninhabitable? Billions of people live there. That is precisely what disturbs us. Veth's voice carried something that sounded almost like fear. Let me explain. Most species in the galaxy evolved on worlds with stable environments. Low gravity, gentle weather, abundant resources, minimal competition. This is the normal path of evolution. And Earth? Earth is not normal. Veth paused as if struggling to believe what they were about to say. 70% of your world's surface is covered with a liquid that is toxic to most known life forms. Your atmosphere contains a highly corrosive gas that would poison us within minutes. You call this gas oxygen. Lee Jinho said nothing. He had never thought of oxygen as dangerous. Veth continued. Your planet experiences violent geological events, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. Your weather patterns include hurricanes, tornadoes, and extreme temperature variations. Your star bombards your surface with harmful radiation, and your world's gravity is nearly twice what most species consider comfortable. We call that normal weather, Lee Jinho said slowly. Yes, we know. That is the problem. Veth's voice grew quieter. But none of that is the most frightening thing about your world. The most frightening thing is what evolved there. You did not develop in isolation and peace. You developed through billions of years of violent competition. Every creature on your planet is either a predator, prey, or both. You fought each other for resources from the moment life began. Your bodies are built for conflict. Your minds are shaped by survival. In the caves of Terrace, Dr. Yoon Hana listened to the transmission as she worked on a wounded Volani. She had never thought about Earth this way before. To her, home was beautiful. Oceans and mountains and forests. But she was beginning to see it through alien eyes. Your bodies, Veth said, are made of dense muscle and bone. You can survive injuries that would kill any Concord species instantly. You heal rapidly. You adapt to almost any environment. You can eat almost anything organic. You can survive extreme temperatures, extreme pressures, extreme pain. You are, from our perspective, nearly indestructible. Lieutenant Choi Mai-rei thought about this as she helped move supplies on the planet's surface. She remembered how the Volani had called her hands like stone. She remembered how carefully she had to move to avoid hurting them with simple touches. The Keth, it turned out, were afraid. They had never encountered a species like humanity. Their empire had been built on harvesting weaker civilizations. They had never faced beings who fought back with such ferocity, who refused to die when they should, who kept coming even when wounded. One captured Keth officer described the boarding of the Harvester with something like horror in his clicking voice. "We shot them," he said. "We hit them with weapons that would have killed any Concord species. But they did not fall. They kept moving. They kept fighting. One of them was bleeding from wounds that should have ended his life. But he was laughing as he fought us. What kind of creatures laugh while dying?" Sergeant Bei Sunho, when told about this, just shrugged. "We call it adrenaline," he said. "When things get bad, our bodies give us the strength to keep going. It has saved many human lives over the years." Adrenaline. The translator repeated the word to the Keth prisoner. The Keth shuddered. News of the Deathworlders spread across the galaxy faster than light. The Keth Dominion had been undefeated for 600 years. Every species they targeted eventually surrendered or died. But now, a new player had entered the game. And this player did not follow the rules. On Terrace, the Villani watched the humans with new understanding. Thiessen spent long hours talking with Admiral Lee Jinho, trying to comprehend these strange beings who had crossed the stars to help strangers. "You come from a world that tried to kill you every day," Thiessen said. "Yet, you survived. You thrived. And then, when you finally reached the stars, instead of conquering as the Keth do, you answered a cry for help. Why?" Lee Jinho thought about the question carefully. "Perhaps because we know what it is like to struggle. On Earth, survival was never guaranteed. We learned that the only way to survive was to work together. Families, tribes, nations. We fought each other too, yes. We made terrible mistakes. But we also learned to help each other. Maybe that is the lesson our harsh world taught us. When everything is trying to kill you, you hold on to each other." Thiessen considered this. The Concord species believe that civilization comes from peace and plenty. They think that harsh environments produce only monsters. But you are not monsters. "We can be," Lee Jinho admitted. "Humans have done monstrous things. But we can also be kind. We can be brave. We can choose to be better than our circumstances." Dr. Yoon Hana finished treating another patient and joined the conversation. She was exhausted, but there was a fire in her eyes. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what makes us different. Our bodies are tough because they had to be. But our minds are tough too. We expect difficulty. We expect setbacks. When something goes wrong, we do not give up. We adapt. We find another way." "The Keth have never needed to adapt," Thiessen said. "They simply crush whatever stands before them." "Until now," Mireille added, entering the shelter. The lieutenant had just returned from helping coordinate the fleet's defenses. More Keth ships were arriving every day. The situation was growing worse. But she did not seem afraid. "They do not understand us," Mireille said. "They see small ships and assume we are weak. They see wounds that would kill them and assume we are dying. They cannot imagine what we really are. And what are we?" Thiessen asked. Mireille smiled. It was not a gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who had looked at impossible odds and decided to fight anyway. "We are survivors," she said. "Our ancestors survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They survived everything our planet could throw at them. And when Earth ran out of challenges, we reached for the stars. Now, we are here. And we are not going to stop." The Keth reinforcements continued to arrive. Soon, they would have enough ships to overwhelm the human fleet through sheer numbers. Admiral Lee Jinho knew they could not stay and fight forever. They needed to change the equation, but something else was happening. Something the Keth had not anticipated. Across the galaxy, other species were watching. Species that had been conquered. Species that had been enslaved. Species that had accepted their fate because they believed resistance was impossible. They were beginning to hope, and hope, once kindled, is very hard to extinguish. The Deathworlders had arrived. Word of the human victory at Terrace spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. It reached slave colonies where workers had forgotten what hope felt like. It reached hidden refugee camps where survivors whispered about myths and legends. It reached the halls of the Galactic Concord where ancient species debated whether the rumors could possibly be true. The Keth Dominion had ruled unchallenged for 600 years. Every species they targeted eventually fell. It was considered a law of the universe, as unchangeable as gravity. But now, that law had been broken. Admiral Lee Jinho did not rest after the second battle. He knew the Keth would return with a larger force. He knew that 12 human ships, no matter how skilled their crews, could not hold forever. They needed to change the game entirely. Engineer Han Jisu provided the first breakthrough. She was a small woman with quick hands and a mind that never stopped working. While others celebrated the victory, she studied the wreckage of captured Keth ships. What she found made her smile. "They're faster than light drives," she explained to the admiral. "Are actually quite simple. Elegant, but simple. And inefficient. I believe I can improve them." Within 2 weeks, human ships were traveling 40% faster than before. The Keth could no longer predict where the human fleet would appear. Admiral Lee Jinho used this advantage ruthlessly. The human fleet did not wait at Terrace for the next attack. Instead, they struck Keth positions across 3 star systems. They freed slave colonies. They destroyed harvesting stations. They hit supply lines and left before the enemy could respond. Lieutenant Choi Mireille led one of these raids against a Keth mining facility. The facility was built on an asteroid, where thousands of enslaved workers from a dozen species toiled under brutal conditions. When the human assault craft breached the outer walls, Mireille was first through the opening. She found workers huddled in the darkness, their eyes wide with fear. They expected punishment. They expected death. What they got was something none of them had ever seen. "We are here to help you," Mireille said through the translator. "We are taking you away from this place." An elderly worker, barely able to stand, reached out with trembling hands and touched Mireille's arm. He seemed to be testing whether she was real. "The whispers," he said. "The whispers spoke of beings from a death world. Beings who fight the Keth and win. We thought it was just a story. A dream to make the suffering easier." "It is not a dream," Mireille said gently. "We are real. And you are free." The workers did not know how to react. Some wept, some collapsed. Some simply stared, unable to process what was happening. They had been slaves for so long that freedom seemed like a foreign concept. But as the days passed, something began to change. Former slaves started to ask questions. They wanted to know about Earth. They wanted to know about humans. And they wanted to know how they could help fight the Keth. At first, Admiral Lee Jinho was hesitant. These beings had no military training. They had been broken by years of brutal captivity. How could they possibly contribute to a war? It was Dr. Kim Do-yoon, the linguist who had first translated the Vellani distress call, who changed his mind. "They do not need to be soldiers," Do-hyun argued. "They have something more valuable than combat skills. They have knowledge. They know Keth systems, Keth routines, Keth weaknesses. They have been watching their enemies for years. Let them share what they know." Intelligence began to flow from liberated populations. Former slaves described Keth command structures, supply routes, and critical facilities. They revealed that the Keth were not as unified as they appeared. Different factions competed for power. Different colonies hoarded resources. The mighty Keth Dominion was held together more by fear than by loyalty. "If we strike the right targets, Mireille said during a strategy meeting. We could turn their own divisions against them. The human fleet changed tactics. Instead of simple raids, they began targeted strikes designed to make different Keth factions blame each other. They intercepted communications and planted false information. They used the chaos to free more worlds and recruit more allies. Other species began to join the fight. At first, they were just individuals. A Vallani scientist who wanted revenge for their destroyed world. A former slave who could not forget the suffering they had witnessed. A young warrior from a species that had surrendered to the Keth 3 generations ago, but never stopped dreaming of freedom. Then small groups began to form. Crews of mixed species who volunteered for the most dangerous missions. They called themselves the Free Worlds Alliance. The name started as a joke, but it soon became something real. Admiral Li Jinho insisted that humans not lead the alliance. This is not our galaxy, he told his officers. We came to help, not to conquer. The other species must lead their own liberation. But humans did something perhaps more important. They trained. They taught. They shared. Sergeant Beisuho found himself running combat training for volunteers from a dozen different species. It was challenging. Some had never held a weapon. Some had bodies that were not built for fighting. But all of them had courage, and courage could be shaped into something powerful. You will not fight like humans, Sungho told his trainees. Your bodies are different. Your strengths are different. But every species has advantages. Find yours. Use them. A species with 4 arms learned to operate multiple weapons simultaneously. A species with incredible hearing became expert scouts. A species with natural camouflage became masters of ambush. The Keth had always relied on overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that used such creative tactics. The Galactic Concord watched these developments with growing concern. An envoy was sent to speak with Admiral Li Jinho. Veth of the Morth arrived on a diplomatic vessel, carrying warnings from the ancient species. You must stop this, Veth said. You do not understand what you are doing. The Keth will not accept defeat. They will bring their full armada. They will come for your homeworld. They will destroy you utterly. Admiral Li Jinho listened patiently. Then he asked a simple question. Where was the Concord when the Vallani were dying? Veth had no answer. Where was the Concord when the Keth enslaved 100 species? When they harvested worlds and left nothing but ashes? Where were your ancient and wise civilizations when innocent people cried out for help? We calculated the risk, Veth said quietly. War with the Keth would have cost too many lives. And how many lives have been lost because you did nothing? Li Jinho's voice was hard, but not cruel. How many more will be lost if we follow your example? Lieutenant Mireille stepped forward. Protocol said she should not speak during a diplomatic meeting. She spoke anyway. Respectfully, she said, you made a calculation. You decided that some lives were worth less than others. That some people could be sacrificed if it kept you safe. We made a different calculation. We decided that anyone asking for help deserves an answer. Veth studied the young lieutenant for a long moment. You are young. You do not understand how the galaxy works. Maybe that is exactly why we could do something you could not, Mireille replied. We did not know the rules. So we did not know we were supposed to be afraid. The diplomatic meeting ended without resolution. The Concord would not join the fight. But they would not interfere either. For ancient beings who prided themselves on wisdom, it was a humbling moment. The young species from the Deathworld was doing what they had never dared to do. The Free Worlds Alliance grew stronger every week. Former slaves became fighters. Fighters became leaders. Leaders became symbols of hope. The Keth, for the first time in their history, were being pushed back. But Admiral Li Jingho knew the real battle was still coming. The Keth would not accept this humiliation. They were gathering their forces. Reports spoke of hundreds of ships being assembled, the largest fleet the Dominion had ever created. And its target was clear: Earth. The Keth had decided that the only way to end this rebellion was to destroy it at its source. Kill the Deathworlders, and the others would lose hope. Burn their homeworld, and the galaxy would remember what happened to those who resisted. When the intelligence reached the human fleet, a heavy silence fell over every ship. Officers who had fought bravely in distant systems suddenly felt the weight of what they had started. They had come to save strangers. Now, their own home was in danger. Admiral Li Jingho gathered his senior officers. "We have a choice," he said. "We can return to Earth and prepare its defenses. Or we can continue the fight here and hope that our allies can slow the Keth down." It was not really a choice. Everyone knew what they had to do. "We go home," Li Jingho said. "We defend our world. And we show the galaxy that Deathworlders do not break." The human fleet prepared to depart. But they did not leave alone. Ships from a dozen species volunteered to join them. Former slaves who had been given their freedom. The Lani who had been saved from extinction. Warriors from worlds that had suffered under Keth rule for generations. Thyssen, the Volani leader, sent a message to Admiral Li Jingho before the departure. "You came to us when no one else would," Thyssen said. "Now we come to you. Whatever happens, you will not face it alone." Li Jingho felt something he had not expected. Pride, yes, but also humility. They had started something that had grown beyond anything they had imagined. The fleet jumped to faster than light travel. Destination: Earth. The Keth Armada arrived in Earth's solar system on a morning in late autumn. 400 warships darkened the sensors of every human station and satellite. They came with weapons that could crack continents. They came with soldiers bred for slaughter. They came to end the Deathworlder threat forever. What they found surprised them. Earth had prepared. Every orbital station had been converted into a weapons platform. The Moon, humanity's oldest colony, had become a fortress bristling with defensive systems. Asteroid mining ships had been refitted with weapons. And waiting in the shadow of Earth itself was the combined fleet of the Free Worlds Alliance. Admiral Li Jingho stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge, watching the enemy approach. His hair had turned completely gray in the months since the first battle at Terrace. He had not slept properly in weeks. But his eyes were clear and his voice was steady. "All ships," he broadcast across every frequency. "This is Admiral Li Jingho. Today, we fight for our home. But we also fight for something larger. We fight to prove that the strong do not get to crush the weak. We fight to prove that hope is not foolish. Whatever happens today, remember what brought us here." Someone asked for help. We answered. The Keth Supreme Commander responded with a broadcast of his own. His clicking voice carried across space, translated into every language. "Deathworlders, you have caused the Dominion much trouble. We respect this in our way. Surrender now, and we will make your end quick. Resist, and we will burn your world so thoroughly that nothing will grow for 1,000 years." Admiral Li Jingho smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You know," he said, "someone once asked me why we came all the way to Terrace to help strangers. I could not find the right words at the time. But now I know." He leaned forward in his command chair. "We came because it was right. And we stay because we refuse to be anything less than what we are." He cut the communication. "All ships, attack." The battle for Earth began. It was chaos unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships wove between Keth destroyers, exploiting every weakness that months of intelligence had revealed. Allied vessels from a dozen species fought alongside them, each using the unique advantages of their kind. Lieutenant Choi Mireille piloted a fighter squadron directly into the heart of the Keth formation. Her ship was small and fast, designed for hit-and-run attacks. She had trained for this moment her entire career. "Stay with me," she told her squadron. "We are heading for the command ship." The Keth flagship was enormous, a twisted mass of metal and weapons that made even the largest human carrier look like a toy. It commanded the entire armada. Kill it, and the Keth would fall into confusion, just as they had in the first battle at Terrace. But the flagship was protected by 100 smaller ships. Getting close seemed impossible. Myra did not believe in impossible. Her squadron cut through the defensive screen, losing ships with every passing moment. Pilots she had trained with, friends she had shared meals with, vanished in flashes of fire. But they did not stop. They could not stop. On Earth's surface, Sergeant Bae Sun-ho led ground forces against the Keth landing in the Korean peninsula. The enemy had managed to break through the orbital defenses in one sector, dropping troops near major population centers. The battle was brutal. Keth soldiers fought with the desperation of beings who knew they had everything to lose. But human soldiers fought with something the Keth could not match. They fought for their homes, their families, their very planet. Fighting alongside Sun-ho were Vellani volunteers who had never experienced Earth's heavy gravity or harsh weather. Rain poured down in sheets, something the Vellani had never seen before. The ground was thick mud that sucked at their thin legs. But they did not retreat. They stood with their human allies and fought. One young Vellani, barely more than a child by their species standards, asked Sun-ho a question during a brief pause in the fighting. "Does your world always try to kill you?" Sun-ho looked at the rain, the mud, the distant flashes of lightning. He laughed despite everything. "This is actually a nice day," he said. "You should see the hurricanes." The Vellani stared at him with something between horror and admiration. In orbit, Captain Park Yuna coordinated communications for the entire defense network. She had come full circle from the woman who first heard the Vellani cry for help to one of the key figures in the battle for Earth, when Keth jamming signals threatened to cut off fleet communications. She improvised a solution using old radio frequencies that the enemy had never thought to block. "Sometimes," she told her team, "the oldest tools are the best." The battle raged for hours. Ships were destroyed on both sides. The moon's surface was scarred by weapons fire. Several human cities took damage from orbital bombardment before the attackers were driven back. But slowly, the tide began to turn. The Keth had never faced an enemy like this. They had never fought beings who would not surrender, who would not break, who kept coming no matter how much punishment they took. Their commanders, used to easy victories, made mistakes under pressure. Their soldiers, who had only known conquest, began to waver. Lieutenant Mireille reached the Keth flagship. Her squadron had been reduced to 3 ships. She led them into a gap in the flagship shields, a weakness identified by intelligence from former slaves who had once worked aboard such vessels. The flagship's bridge was deep inside the massive ship. Mireille's fighter would not survive the attack. She knew this. She accepted it. But at the last moment, something unexpected happened. A Vellani cruiser, one of the few ships the species had managed to build in the months since their rescue, appeared beside her. It was small and lightly armed, but it was enough to draw fire away from Marie's squadron. The Vellani captain's voice came through the communication channel. "You came for us when no one else would. Today, we fly with you. Whatever happens, we face it together." The combined attack breached the flagship's defenses. Mireille's weapons found the command bridge. The Keth Supreme Commander died in a flash of fire and debris. With the flagship gone, the Keth Armada faltered. Ships that had fought with perfect coordination now moved in confusion. Human and allied forces pressed their advantage, picking off enemy vessels one by one. Then, something remarkable happened. The remaining Keth ships began to retreat. They had never retreated before. In 600 years of conquest, the Keth Dominion had never lost a major battle. They had never known defeat. But today, they ran. A cheer went up across the human fleet, across the allied ships, across the surface of Earth, where people had watched the battle in the sky and prayed for survival. They had won. The aftermath was long and difficult. Many had died. Cities needed to be rebuilt. Wounds, both physical and emotional, needed time to heal. But something had changed in the galaxy. The Keth Dominion did not survive the defeat at Earth. As news spread of their retreat, populations across their territory rose up in rebellion. The Free Worlds Alliance, now led by a council of representatives from dozens of species, liberated system after system. Within a year, the Dominion had collapsed entirely. The Galactic Concord, shamed by their inaction, formally requested alliance with the Free Worlds. After much debate, the request was granted. The ancient species would have to learn new ways of thinking, but they would have the chance. 6 months after the battle, a memorial was dedicated on Terrace, the world where it all began. Beings from across the galaxy gathered to remember those who had fallen and to celebrate what had been achieved. Thiessen, the Villani leader who had sent the original cry for help, spoke at the ceremony. "When we sent that message into the void," Thiessen said, "we had lost all hope. We believed the universe was cold and empty, that the strong would always crush the weak, that no one would ever come. But someone did come. From a world that should have killed them, from a species that should not have survived, they came. They heard our cry. They answered, and they taught us something we had forgotten." Thiessen paused, looking out at the gathered beings. "They taught us that hope is not weakness, that compassion is not foolishness, that the measure of a species is not their power, but their willingness to use that power for others. The humans came from a death world. They could have used their strength for conquest, as the Keth did. Instead, they chose to help strangers. And in doing so, they changed everything." Admiral Lee Jinho, now retired, watched the ceremony from his home on Earth. His granddaughter sat beside him. She was named Myre, after the lieutenant who had become a legend. "What was it like?" young Myre asked. "Fighting the Keth?" Lee Jinho thought about the question for a long time. "Honestly," he said, "we were terrified. Every day. We had no idea if we would survive. We did not know if we were doing the right thing. We just knew that someone needed help, and we were able to give it. But you went anyway." "Yes, we went anyway." He smiled at his granddaughter. "Sometimes the right thing and the scary thing are the same thing. That does not make the right thing wrong. It just means you have to be brave enough to do it." Young Myre looked out the window at the night sky. Somewhere up there, ships from 100 worlds traveled between the stars. Species that had once been enemies now worked together. Children who had been born into slavery now grew up free. "I want to help people too," she said. "Like you did." Admiral Lee Jinho put his arm around his granddaughter.